Okay. I'm Linda Little. I'll just give my brief personal background. Born and raised in Macon County. My husband and I have 4 grown children. We celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary this past Monday. Like I said, I'm a graduate of the Decatur Public Schools. My mom lives in the house that they bought when I was 2, so that's where my roots are. I am on the Macon County Board. I have been for 18 years. I won my first election in '94, lost one in the middle there, and took another job assignment in the middle there, but altogether I've put in about 18 years on the board. I enjoy local government. I think it's very, very important. And over the years of being on the county board, I've just become more and more frustrated with what's going on or not going on at the state level. So the opportunity came up to step it up, and my kids are all grown, so I don't have to worry about them not thinking I'm perfect anymore. So I decided this was a good time to take that step.
What are some of your priorities as a candidate or as a potential state legislator?
I think the priorities facing the state right now is to get the spending in check, to make sure money that is being spent wisely on truly necessary programs, and jobs. We've got to increase business in Illinois. We have to be a state that companies are looking at to come to, and we have to keep the businesses that are here and encourage them to grow, as well as draw new businesses into the state.
So do you have an example of an unnecessary spending program that you think ought to be eliminated or reduced?
I think there are several examples. I think the NRI is one that I think most people would agree was not money well spent. I don't have an entire list, haven't been through the budget of every program that the state funds at this point. I think there is wasteful spending that needs to be addressed. I think there's money not being spent entirely wisely. Several years ago, I think Medicaid comes to mind as it is the largest pot of money in the state. Several years ago, they did do reforms and showed a significant savings by cleaning house and making sure that the money was being spent the way it was intended and properly. Since that time, those efforts to keep that in check have been rolled back and are no longer being enforced as strongly as they were. And in my opinion, that's like cleaning the house once and expecting it to stay clean. I don't know about your house, but that doesn't work at mine. I think they need to stay on that. And since it is the largest pot of money in the state, it needs a lot of attention.
So some of the things on Medicaid, at least a couple of them, the reason they rolled them back is they found out they were spending more as a consequence of their so-called money-saving efforts. Adult dental care, I think, was one of them, where if people couldn't get preventive care, they end up in an emergency room and they have some kind of oral problem. Do you not think that that their rationale for that is legitimate?
I think that is a legitimate rationale. I do believe preventive is almost always a better investment than reactive. And if I gave the impression that everything they did was perfect and they should have maintained all of it, then I apologize for that. I think it has to be a developing learning curve as you go with anytime you make cuts and that thing. That's the reason to continue the audit, is to make sure that the services being provided truly are needed and responsible.
Your ad told me that you want to stop Quinn's runaway spending and reckless mismanagement. Anything beyond NRI? And are you talking about Medicaid? Because how do you do that? And because I think you don't want to extend the income tax either, correct?
Correct.
So again, are there like billions of dollars you're talking about that can be cut somewhere, or how are you going to balance those things?
I think there are significant amounts of money that can be saved, and at this point, I don't believe that state government has the trust of the people to warrant any kind of a tax increase. And you have to rebuild that trust. You have to convince your citizenry that you are truly watching out for their best interest. Department of Corrections is another example of bad management. We've spent what I believe is $60 million so far on overtime for correctional officers. Our prisons are they're overpopulated, and you've got a staff that's working overtime. That's a bad combination.
So you want to hire more staff?
Yes, hiring more staff is cheaper than paying $60 million in overtime.
Okay, you know what you would save and how many people you want to hire, and then again, how do you do that if you lose a few $1 billion if the tax rate goes down from where it is now?
And those are things that need to be discussed. I am not going to sit here and claim to be an expert on the state budget. I have not analyzed it completely. I don't think anyone has. I think people have their expertise in different lines of it, but I'm not convinced that anyone has a very in-depth knowledge of all of it. And as a candidate, that's something I would certainly work towards as a senator.
You mentioned your county board service and seeing state government from that perspective as one of your things propelling you to run. Can you talk a little bit about, like at the local level, some of the specific frustrations you have with state?
A lot of the frustrations at the county level that applies to school districts as well, and that is the unfunded mandates. School districts are hit harder with them than the county is. The county has, we've had our fair share. Even small things that don't really look like unfunded mandates when you read about it in the paper, such as changing the speed limit on unmarked roads. Then I believe it was a couple of years ago there was a change put in on certain types of roads, and if the county didn't want to go along with that, then we had to spend money to make new signs, and that's not millions of dollars, that's not billions of dollars, but it's not right. And school districts have a lot more unfunded mandates that come down that are huge financial impact. At the county, we also have mandates that come down, especially in the Justice Department, in the courts and jails. And while the language of the mandate, it looks good. They really should be doing that, but there's no funding behind it. I think that has to be considered every time a vote is made. Who's going to pay for it, and how are they going to pay for it? And if you just pass it down and say, good luck, and then the locals have to raise their property tax levy or something, to accommodate it, then the locals get blamed for raising taxes when really it was because of the state not wanting to fund a mandate.
I think you just mentioned the sign mandate. Any other criminal justice mandates that should be lifted?
I didn't say they should be lifted. I said if you're going to put a mandate, you need to provide the funding.
Right, but again, your view of how is the state going to survive financially? If you want the tax to come down at least to 3.75, right? Or do you want it to go all the way back down to 3 and 4 years as the governor candidate of your party does?
The tax needs to be implemented as it was implemented. It needs to do the rollback.
About $4 billion next year, and yet you want the state to pay for more stuff like mandates. So how do you do it? How do the books balance?
I think it needs to be a conversation. It absolutely needs to be an open conversation.
You must have an opinion though about what you want to see happen, right? Or how you fill that gap.
I want to see the focus at state government be in business, in promoting business growth. We need to build the tax base, and instead of just increasing the taxes.
And how do you do that?
We make it a business-friendly state.
Does that mean reducing regulation in certain areas?
I think there are some regulations that need to be looked at.
Such as?
Well, one that has been brought to my attention that I wasn't even aware of until I started doing parade routes, I had 4 different people bring it up, which I thought was odd, is that an ex-felon cannot be a hairdresser. And I'm not saying every ex-felon wants to be a hairdresser, but why is that? Isn't that a type of skill that we could teach with? I mean, the women's prison. Yeah. The women's prison in Decatur has a dog grooming program, and so when the women go through the program, then when they get out, they can go go to work in that field. I think things like that. If there's a valid reason why, then I'd be more than happy to hear it, but I haven't heard it. And I think we probably have a lot of things like that out there that are hindering hindering jobs.
Okay. School funding is kind of a big deal, it turns out in this race, because the person you're running against is the sponsor of Senate Bill 16, which would rewrite school aid formula. Do you have an opinion on that and on the version of it that passed the Senate?
I believe the version of Senate Bill 16 that passed the Senate is a very good rough draft to start the conversation with. But, you know, as you said, it has passed the Senate. It's now in Michael Madigan's hands, and admittedly in closed-door sessions with a few of his key people. So when that does come back to the Senate and we take a look at it in the Senate, I'm not sure if anyone who voted for it will even recognize it. I think that's a very, you know, big question mark right now as to what it will look like when it comes back from the
But
House.
are you okay with it as it came out of the Senate? I mean, do you see any things that you think need to be changed in it?
I have some concerns with the funding. On paper, most of the school districts in the 48th district come out ahead. But I've talked to several superintendents, including the Decatur and the Springfield, and they would have, if the state were following its current mandated level of funding, they would be even further ahead than this new one. The new legislation, currently it is supposed to be a mandate that they fund at a certain level. They don't, but you know, the law says it. So I guess it goes back to, do we trust them to really fund it the way that one's worded if they're not even doing it the way they're supposed to now?
I think it's bring equity across the state to how all school districts are funded. Do you see merit in that concept?
I absolutely agree that the current school funding formula is flawed. There's way too much dependency on property taxes. I completely agree that it needed to be tackled, and you know, I commend Senator Menard and the commission that met and took this on. It's not a sexy thing to go after, and it's going to make some unhappy people. But I'm not convinced that the Senate Bill 16 is an excellent final product.
What do you think, by the way, of school choice? I mean, should, again, the governor candidate of your party talks about that a lot. Should there be more charter schools, and should there be some kind of like a voucher program that you could send your kids to a private or a parochial school, if you wish, with state money?
I think the first thing that needs to be addressed is equity in funding of the schools throughout the state, which, as I said, Senate Bill 16 is a good start towards that. We need to get the dependency off of property taxes so that parents aren't frantically going, where can we send my kids? But parents can comfortably say, we have good schools. Charter schools, I think, have their place. We have a charter school in Decatur that is fantastic. They jump through all the hoops that the public schools do, plus other hoops that they have to jump through as a charter. To look statistically with the demographics of the student body in that school, according to most experts, they shouldn't be doing very well, but they are doing well. They consistently come out on top of test scores and that sort of thing for the Decatur Public Schools. And so they are an excellent example of a successful charter school. But you can't run away from the fact that we have inequality in our funding, and that has to be addressed. And then you can decide if other options need to be made available.
Another thing Mr. Rauner has talked about is freezing property taxes, which would require legislative action if that was ever going to come to pass. Obviously, as you pointed out, schools are relying on property taxes. Would you vote for something like that if it came before the Senate?
If it's a one-word bill, yes or no, to freeze property taxes, I would vote no, because units of local government and school districts are dependent on property taxes. And for state government to sit here and decide for every single community and every single drainage ditch and every single library board that, poof, you can't have any more money is absolutely an overstep of their authority. That, you know, because they decide they need more money, and in the middle of the night they pass a huge tax increase, but you're not going to allow the locals to do that, and that's overstepping.
Do you have an opinion on taxing services, or because Illinois taxes almost none of them, and again, the governor candidate talks about a variety of some of them that he hopes would not impact everyday people. Are you okay with looking at that?
Down.
That would be a sales tax on services.
Yeah, I know.
I know. Just to make sure I'm saying the right thing. At
this point, I am not in support of increasing taxes. I've heard the argument from, from the people who are sales taxed and those who aren't, and I understand the difference, and I think there's probably some sort of, I don't know, compromise or, something to be addressed. But right now, I do not believe that state government is being responsible with the money that we have entrusted them with. I have no reason to encourage giving them more.
What's ADM's involvement with the inland terminal over there? Was the county involved in that, or the state government?
The county was involved as far as, I believe it was built in an enterprise zone.
That was created by the county?
Yes, by the county. It was an expansion of an enterprise zone that's already out there. When they told us their plans, what they're going to do, of course, the county was very supportive of it because it has the potential to be a magnet for business. When Illinois becomes a state that business is looking at, it's setting up Macon County to be one of the top places they look.
And were there state dollars involved in that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Was that the enterprise zone that you voted not to extend?
No.
Okay, what was the enterprise zone? Because you're hitting an advertisement for not voting not to extend an enterprise zone.
Yeah,
because you were like the only vote.
Yes, I was the only no vote on that, and I had to look that up because I thought, when did I vote against an enterprise zone? So I did look it up, and it did refresh my memory. That is one nice thing about the county board minutes; they're very detailed minutes. Sometimes maybe that's not a nice thing, but it did help.
Depends if you're running for something else.
The situation on that particular enterprise zone. It was December of 2012, and the city at that time was having discussion about certain types of businesses, and if they wanted to regulate them more or try to discourage them and that sort of thing. The city was having that conversation at the time. This enterprise zone came to the county and placed stipulations. The vote we took was for stipulations on that enterprise zone that was directly related to the conversation the city was still having. And I was not comfortable voting for those stipulations when the city had not finished its conversation. Had those conversations been done, that discussion been over with at the city, I absolutely would have supported the stipulations and the enterprise zones.
And it did get extended by the county board.
Yes.
With everybody's vote.
Yeah, that was my reason for voting against it. I just felt like, let the city finish those discussions. We have passed, I don't know how many enterprise zones in the 18 years I've been on the board, and I don't know, perhaps my opponent knows. They've studied all of my records, I think.
Campaigns.
Yeah, and I don't, I did vote no on that one. I know I voted present on one because I had started a brand new job, and my company was a direct beneficiary of it, and I wasn't sure where that conflict of interest.
You still work outside your home, by the way?
No, I was at ADM,
okay.
And then 2012 they did a huge reduction in force at the corporate office, and apparently I volunteered to help out with their bottom line, and then so I decided
They
to.
volunteered.
They did, yeah.
What kind of job did you have over there?
I worked in human resources and labor relations.
You're familiar with those things, yeah.
Well, you must have a unique perspective then on the debate that's been occurring about whether the state of Illinois should scramble to offer incentives to companies when they threaten to leave a community or the state of Illinois. How do you feel about that? Is this something the state should do, or is there a better way to tackle that?
I don't know that there's a direct yes or no answer to that particular question. I think every situation should be looked at, and the state should decide whether or not to pursue it. The concern that I heard in the community when the state was coming to the rescue was, but what about all the small businesses that are left? What about all the trucking companies that have just crossed the state line? And those are legitimate questions. So I like I said, I don't think that's a direct black and white yes or no answer. I think there are probably situations where it is good for the state to do what they can to maintain certain businesses in the state. I want to help Illinois become a state where that's not the issue. Grabbing them as they're leaving. I want them to want to be here.
On the ADM thing, again, I watch way too much TV and listen to too much radio, but Menard has an ad that when ADM threatened to leave, and I guess they have moved to Chicago, he worked with Democrats and Republicans and, said we have to create jobs in Decatur if we move there. Did they get that done? And are you, was that a good effort?
Had ADM accepted the offer, then it would have been good for Decatur.
Okay, so it was a good effort.
Yes, I think it was a good
but
effort.
That didn't become law or anything?
No, ADM said no.
On the idea of business incentives, and I hate to keep bringing up Rauner, but he has talked about eliminating some business, they're called loopholes, tax incentives, whatever you want to call it. Are you in favor of reviewing those? Do you think there are maybe some out there that are obsolete, have no longer serve their purpose?
I think it's a very valid statement to say when it comes to the IRS, I think there are loopholes and gaps out there that need to be addressed. I have not sat down and studied small business IRS laws and where those are. I'm willing to listen to a valid discussion on anything that is going to make this a more business-friendly state.
Right to work zones he actually had an editorial in our paper, a guest column in our paper before he was a candidate, saying there should be county by county right to work zones available. Are you agree with that?
I don't think Illinois is losing jobs because it is or is not a right to work state. I just don't think that's a true issue right now.
Okay. Partly because I was going back and forth with your campaign and his in the last couple of days, I came across this story that seemed to key on you in June of 2012, the Herald Review, where you were the only no vote on 3 things in one meeting, apparently. And is Tim Dudley a Democrat? Or,
yes.
Okay. Uh-huh. Is the county board mostly Democratic over there?
This is the first time in over 25 years the Republicans have actually had a majority. However, we have a Democrat chairman.
There you go. I'd like to work that out. Anyway.
I'd like to work that one out too, but I can't help you.
You voted against an intergovernmental agreement that would provide Macon County with rural transportation at no cost to the county. It passed 16-1. And then you voted, you were the only vote against a resolution opposing a chemical waste landfill in DeWitt County because it was over the Muhammad Aquifer, and those trying to block it thought that it could hurt the water supply. What was the other one? A self-help center to provide taxpayers with help. You didn't want to spend the $19,000 to keep that going because it wasn't essential. So is this story legitimate? Are you like Dr. No on the board, or what's going on?
No, I'll address those one at a time.
Okay.
The rural transportation, it was not local tax dollars. It is not local tax dollars. I completely agree with that, but it is tax dollars.
Right. Dudley said, and I know he's on the other side, who in the world would vote against rural transportation for the elderly and people with disabilities, he said.
Me. At the time, I saw that, and I still do. I see that as a lovely to have, a nice to have. I know people who use it, and they love it, and that's fine. But I don't see it as a must-have, and I think the federal government should be looking at must-haves versus nice-to-haves as well. So yes, it was not local tax dollars, and most of the people that voted for it said, well, it's not our tax money. So, well, it is. I mean, the federal government's picking the same pockets that we're picking.
So do you not want state projects for your district if you get in? Because it's state money.
And I agree with that, and each one has to be looked at independently. And on this particular issue, I didn't support it.
How about the aquifer thing?
The aquifer thing, I had heard that I voted for toxic waste in the water supply, and so now, I think you're refreshing my memory. I would
take a look.
Well, no,
Yeah,
and
it's like the bottom one there.
and I remember that the vote, and if it is the one that I honestly think it is, and I can research it more and make sure that I'm correct. The issue was PCBs in the DeWitt County landfill. The board had been approached by a group that was totally, completely against it. And they came to the EEHW meeting. They also came to the board meeting, gave a very good presentation as to why it's bad, evil, and we shouldn't vote for it. My concern was I had not heard from the supporters as to why these people were wrong. I know nothing about PCBs in landfill other than what they told me. I'm not comfortable as a legislator, either at the county level or at the state level, of making a vote based on one side of an argument. But no, I'm not a big fan of putting toxic waste into our water supply.
Right. What was the other thing?
Oh, the jobs, the self-help.
Yeah, the self-help for people filling out their taxes
and
or getting help with their property taxes.
Yes, and it is a fabulous thing that we have set up at the county. We set it up as a trial and then decided it was working, and this, I believe, was to come back to continue funding it more. And my vote on that was no, because my understanding, according to our state's attorney, is to amend a budget during the budget year. It needs to be an emergency situation. This is not an emergency situation. It is a lovely to have, and it was well funded, and it was really helping the citizens. I did not feel, this is June, our budget process starts in July. That was the time to bring it. And if you follow through that budget, we did increase that budget. It is a fabulous self-help unit to have. I thought it was bad timing to raise it.
The state's pension reform efforts, how did they do with their reform bill that's now in court? What would you have done differently if you don't think they did a good job?
My statement on pensions is they are a promise. Those who are currently retired thinking they knew what they were going to have in retirement. I believe that's off the table. Employees who have, were hired on with a pension as part of their, part of their agreement, they have that pension. We owe that. New hires going forward, that's a different section. It makes it terribly difficult. That I'm not a fan of messing with people's pensions, but I believe, regardless of how the court finally does come down, I believe that those are promises made, and they're promises that must be kept.
So you can't cut back on the 3% per year increase either?
I can't. I believe that was in their, they got a sweet deal when they retired, but, I can't. It was a promise
when
made.
you say it's off the table completely, because some people say that even if the current law gets struck down, at least go back to the unions and see if you can negotiate some kind of an agreement with them. Would you think even that's off the table then?
I would be willing to listen. My concern with going back to the union, you're going back to how many people representing how many people? Are you going to take it back to the people it's really going to affect? So I'm willing to listen.
I mean, the problem has been that the state's got this $100 billion pension liability, so if the court strikes it down and you don't want to raise taxes, and then you can't make pension payments either into the system. So how do you do? So what do you want to do? Or what would be a solution? Raise taxes more? Or even if you fire everybody, you're not going to have enough money to pay this. So what do you do?
That might make some more job-friendly state, though, so then that would build our tax base. Every nook and cranny has to be looked at for where spending is not being done wisely and efficiently. Pensions are a promise. We cannot go back on our promise.
Because you're going to vote for Bruce Rauner, I take it?
I'm going to vote in the election on November 4th.
Are you not telling us who you're voting for?
I will vote for my Republican candidate, but I'm not sure why I need to tell you who I'm voting for.
Just asking because you're like on the ticket.
Okay.
We did that to Sue Sherry yesterday too, so you're not alone, and it's not a party thing. He thinks that current employees could go to a 401k style plan tomorrow. Does that ruin the promise? Is that unconstitutional in your opinion? Keep the benefit you got until today, but tomorrow's work, you're on a 401k plan.
I think there are things that can be discussed, but right now I think the promises that have been made have to be kept.
In your race, or in this district, one of the more controversial votes that your opponent took when he was very new at this was for marriage equality, same-sex marriage, and I know, there was somewhat of a kerfuffle in the district after that, and you, when I spoke to you first, I think would have been on the other side of that vote, and I'm just wondering, given that the law is now in, are you okay with that? Would you do anything to change it, or is that okay?
It is the law. I do not believe it has an effect on the economy of the state. State government needs to be focused on the economy of the state and paying their bills. If legislation comes up to reverse that, I would support it. It's not high on my list of things that I'm going to spearhead first.
Okay, you are, I'm guessing, pro-life as well?
Yes.
And is there anything legislatively that you would want to do in that vein?
I would consider legislation that comes up. My focus when I get into the Senate is creating an economy that people want to be part of.
Any exceptions on pro-life? Health of the mother, cases of rape, incest, excuse me.
I would listen to legislation addressing true life of the mother issues.
But not rape or incest?
No.
Okay. Stylistically, you've run a couple of ads that I think Mr. Hodis has put together for you that don't have you in them. And I know Senator Menard, who has apparently been involved in a lot of campaigns, I'm guessing, given what he used to do at the legislature, thinks it's very odd for you to run. Really, you're up to over $300,000 in fundraising now, a lot from Senator Radonio's organization. And people in Springfield probably don't know you because the ads keep, I gotta tell you, I love this, nada from an hour or whatever, I think that's a really funny line. But why aren't you in those ads? Why aren't you introducing yourself other than on the radio ad?
I'm introducing myself on the radio ad. More importantly, I'm introducing myself door to door. We have a campaign strategy in mind that I'm happy with and I believe will be successful. And it's coming.
One of the radio ad things says that you will shut down Quinn's political slush fund standing up to corruption. Isn't that the NRI, and isn't that shut down already?
Well, that particular three-letter acronym one is.
Is there another slush fund that we don't know about? Or?
I think you have to always be watching for inappropriate use of taxpayer money.
Well, it says you were talking about the slush fund. Is that what you were talking about in the ad? Because I know this ad's been running for like 2 months.
That's the one that's been referenced. That was
NRI
referenced
shut
in
down
that
2 years
statement.
ago, actually. That was just a bad audit, but I understand.
You said you're going door to door, that's your main
Yes.
campaign strategy. Do you know how many doors you've been knocking on, or how often are you out? Where are you focused? Springfield much?
Gosh, when I'm out, I try to hit 200 doors a day. And, some weeks I'm out 4 and 5 days a week. Other weeks, life jumps in and I don't get out that often. No, I don't have a direct count. I think it might scare me. I put a hole in my second pair of shoes, but...
One of the things that Menard's also worked on periodically is trying to get additional money for Springfield schools because we have such a large number of state buildings that are tax exempt, therefore do not contribute to the property tax base. Would you be interested in pursuing that kind of legislation if you're elected?
Like I said, education reform is an absolute priority. We have to have good schools. They have to be equitably funded, and that is an issue that affects the equity of funding. So it does need to be looked at. And
a couple of other issues, gambling expansion that's on the table, off the table, depending on what day you're talking. How do you feel about that?
I do not support expansion of gambling.
Under any circumstances?
I mean, I'll listen. I'm not going to shut the door and say, oh, it's gambling. No. I'm willing to listen. I don't think it's a fix.
Okay. I mean, because one of the arguments in favor of expanding gambling is one of the previous versions of the bill allocated money for agricultural programs, horse racing industry, which in this area, means something to people. It's not obviously in the latest iterations of the bill, but at least that was one of the arguments for many downstate lawmakers to support the idea. But you still are against the idea.
Well, I'm against the idea. I'll listen. The lottery was going to save our schools back in the 80s. Has your school's been saved? No, it hasn't. I'm not convinced that increasing gambling is a good investment at this time.
With all of the video poker machines or whatever and all of the restaurants and bars now, have you noticed any negative effect of that, or are you just philosophically kind of opposed to that, or is it because I know the opponents for years have used the moral argument, this is a bad thing, you're hurting families, and then the state keeps expanding. Have you noticed any positives or negatives from that?
Both. I have friends that own restaurants and bars where they've put in the video gambling, and as the business owner, it has increased their business. But the very same owner that's saying, "Yeah, I'm bringing in more money," says, but it's discouraging to them because the people that are playing them constantly are the folks who shouldn't be spending their money on that. But you can't walk up to somebody and say, "You really shouldn't be spending your money on gambling." So that's the catch-22. So I'm not convinced that the benefits of expansion of gambling are good.
I know you have a child in the military, correct?
Yes.
Because I know I've been listening to you. And you advertise you'll do more for veterans. What is lacking or what needs to be done?
We need to make sure that our veterans are protected, and I know the state has hiring policies that do encourage the hiring of veterans, and I think that's a good thing. And I've talked to a lot of veterans, especially when things were blowing up in Washington over veterans and that sort of thing. And the general response in the district that I've heard is they're happy with their local veterans group and the leaders there and their clinics. They're not one of the ones that feels like they're not getting medical treatment. One of the big concerns I've heard is how long it takes for anything that does happen to be Washington-based red tape, that sort of thing. And in the lower southern part of the district, they'd like to see a clinic a little closer to home, that sort of thing. But on the younger veterans, the issues I see are a lot of times when a soldier is deployed, the spouse sometimes comes back home, to stay while they're just, well, it's all back to jobs. Sometimes they don't come back because they've got a better job in Alaska than they would if they came home to be with family. And also, when our veterans do come home and have completed their time in the service, these are excellent employees. They're excellent. I don't know anyone who owns a business that doesn't get excited when a young vet applies for work. They have a work ethic that just can't be duplicated, and they're smart, they have a great work ethic, and people want to hire them. We need those jobs to be here so that they want to come back home to Illinois.
One of the significant issues going on in Springfield and infrastructure and all, we're building this 10th Street corridor, high-speed rail with federal money. IDOT is quite involved, and over the years the state has subsidized Amtrak service. Do you have any philosophy on if the state should be doing the high-speed thing and accepting that money from the feds as we did, because there are matching dollars that need to be there, and any subsidy for Amtrak? Any thoughts on that?
I've been paying attention to the high-speed rail issue because Macon County's been involved, because Decatur wants to be sure and be on the loop. And depending on which plan you look at, Decatur either is or isn't on the loop. So I've been over here for several study sessions and that sort of thing. I think high-speed rail will be an asset to this part of the state when we become a business-friendly state.
What does that mean, that the state should put money into it?
Well, yes, just as Decatur is building its infrastructure and that sort of thing, and so is Springfield, to be prepared when they start looking at the state. You want to be first on the list for where they look to go. It's a big state.
Are you comfortable with the concealed carry law, the way it's been implemented, and just on restrictions? Do you think any of them should be loosened on where you can carry? Or
I'm comfortable with the legislation as it is. I think once it's been on the books for a while, and keep talking to our law enforcement and throughout the state, and see if they're noticing something needs to be addressed. That's when you would address those issues. Right now, I don't see anything in the concealed carry that gives me alarm.
No. Are you a Radonio person, or somebody said at one point thought you might like McCarter or for leader, or do you have any opinion on that?
I read that in an article.
Yeah. I didn't write it. I just saw it. So.
The leader Radonio and I get along terrifically,
Okay.
and no one has approached me about.
Okay.
I'm focusing on getting in the Senate, and
And just a campaign tactic. One of your one of the, well, it's the only Republican party says Menard didn't attend some commission on jobs, and he says that he was, busy in the legislature and doing other things, and they say that you're on the Macon County Board's legislative committee.
Yes.
That you get a stipend for, but it hasn't met since 2012.
Yes, that's correct. We put the way the committee form of government in Macon County works is you have to give 48 hours notice, call a committee meeting, then you have to have whatever's decided in the committee has to be approved by the full board at the following board meeting. What we found when we established this legislative committee was it doesn't work that way because if there's a hot issue in going on at the Capitol, okay, now we have to call a committee meeting, and then we have to wait till the next board meeting in order to have the support of the board to try to address the issue or to get the word out about the issue. And so when we first set up the committee, we did the meetings, and we were always talking hindsight. It's like, well, this is what happened, So that wasn't working. I discussed it with Chairman Dunn, who established the committee and put me in charge of it. And a year ago, 2012, or was it last? I don't know. At least a year ago, yeah. I talked to him, and you can ask Jay Dunn. I talked to him. I said, this isn't working. This format doesn't work. I said, if you want to, I said, really, what I think would work best would be to have a Republican and a Democrat work together on, paying attention to what's going on, and if we think it's something the county needs to address, and then work with our prospective legislators in Springfield and report back to the board, rather than just doing, trying to follow the way it's set up to be run. And he said, well, that's probably a good idea. I said, and, I shouldn't be getting chairman's pay for doing something like that. And he said, no, because I want you to stay on top of it. And he insisted to keep that in there as a committee and for me to stay on it. $500 a year.
Okay, so that continues, and that's just to be in charge. That's like a liaison from the board to legislative stuff?
Yes.
So when it says legislative committee, that's like state legislation?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we do follow some federal, but typically state legislation has a more direct impact on us.
Do you do some of that? Do you talk to your legislators about stuff?
Yes. A lot of it in the last year has just been encouraging our board members to, say, how's this affect your district? And trying to encourage individual involvement in
like a county lobbyist?
And
that's a bad word. I'm sorry.
So we address those issues. We talk to the highway department or whoever's being impacted, and that sort of thing. One piece of legislation that did go through, and that we talked to our legislators and they went through. In fact, I got to testify in front of a committee, which I thought I was going to die when I did that, but I did. Was public building commissions own our county buildings. And the way the law was written, you could only rent space to government agencies or senators, representatives. The city of Decatur built their own police department, so it vacated a lot of space in one of our buildings, which was nice. We needed it for some of our offices, but then we found that we have space now that we're paying rent on that's empty, and there's just not that many senators and legislators looking for space. So we did come to Springfield and asked them to change that so that it can be rented out to nonprofits that have a relationship with the county, such as CASA or Child Advocacy, that sort of thing. Yes, it did. Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts on term limits?
I would vote for term limits. Yes.
For state lawmakers?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So are you going to limit yourself to a certain number of years?
Yes.
How many?
Well, as many times as I get reelected, or probably 2 terms, because I believe that's what term limits should be.
Let's see. Which would be? Is that going to be? I don't know how.
8 years.
8 years. Okay.
So how is it you came to be a Republican?
I don't know. I mean, I just. I guess I'm conservative in a lot of my views, and I just found that, of course, when I was in high school, that's when you really start thinking, ooh, I'm going to get to vote pretty soon. And so you start looking at candidates, and you kind of figure out who you agree with the most. And, there have been times when agreeing the most with doesn't necessarily mean seeing eye to eye on everything. And I think that should be true for everybody.
Did you find yourself at all beholden for the people who have supplied this $300,000 to the campaign? I know one analysis I saw, Ronner's putting a lot of money into the party, and the party is giving to Radonio, and I'm not sure of all of this, but certainly it's Republican sources. Is that, do you feel that you'd have to stick with the caucus on anything, or is there anything in particular you disagree with?
I believe I am beholden to the citizens that will put me in the Senate and what benefits my district.
There's been quite a few conversations lately about consolidating local government. That's something that Bruce Rauner said he would like to look at. He says Illinois has too many units. You are part of local government. Do you see a need for that kind of consolidation in Illinois?
Kind of off the cuff, but if you're going to shut down units of government, you should shut down the least effective and the least efficient. And I don't think that's always township and county that comes out at the top of the list of being inefficient with taxpayer dollars. It's a conversation that I would listen to. I'm not adamantly charging one way or the other. I do know that smaller units of government in the southern part of the state are more important than they are in the northern part of the state, just because of geography. Township government in the more rural areas is very active and needed, and is a very good. It's very good to have. Like I said, I'd be willing to listen, but right now I'm not, leading a charge to change that.
Minimum wage?
I would not vote to increase minimum wage.
And why?
I'm not a big fan of dictating to businesses what they have to pay. I wouldn't support getting rid of a minimum wage either at this point. But we have it. It's there. I would not support raising it.
Do you think it ought to be tied to the federal level? Because we're a couple bucks ahead, above them right now. So.
No, I think that's something that every state needs to establish for themselves.
We have gone our 45 minutes. So I just wanted to see if there are any final questions from you.
I'm just wondering, excuse me, so how is it you decide to run for
State Senate.
I mean, do people approach you and say, you've done a good job in the county? I don't want to give you any answers, but I just kind of wonder how.
Well,
how people
I've
make
been
that
approached
decision.
probably over the last 10 years asking me to consider running for the House. And like I said, when my kids were young, I wanted them to still think Mom was perfect before they started seeing TV ads about, dumping toxic waste into the water supply and that sort of thing. But my kids are all grown now, and most of them have pretty much figured out that I'm not perfect. So I've accepted that. And a year ago, September, I was approached about this seat. And at the county, we'd become more and more frustrated, and as a citizen, I've become more and more frustrated. And my husband and I talked about it, and I talked to some other important individuals in my life, and decided, this is a good time to go for it. I think I'll be an excellent senator. I think I will truly represent the values and the needs of the 48th district.
Do you have any question?
I don't think we hit medical marijuana. Your views on that and marijuana legalization in general?
I have concerns that federally it is illegal, and yet state by state, states are snubbing their nose at the federal government. I have concerns with that, not just on marijuana, just in general. If you broke that down, what if county by county we decided to start looking at the state government, saying, no, you guys are wrong, we're going to do it our way. I have real concerns on that level of it. I think it is an issue that needs to be addressed at the federal level. But now that Illinois has jumped on the Colorado bandwagon, then I think it's going to be a watch and see. It seems like they've put quite a few regulations on the zoning and that sort of thing. There was some concern early on at the county level for zoning. It's like, okay, what are we going to do? So we were starting to look at zoning issues and that sort of thing. And then, that fell to the state. The county has no input at all, which we're a little concerned with. As far as I know, I don't have any friends that are corn growers that are ready to convert over. It's a very, very expensive endeavor. Right now, it's a watch and see, but my initial reaction is that we are violating federal law, and I have concerns with that.
So you're not for legalization, clearly.
Clearly.